Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to College Football Red Zone, your exclusive home for 7+ hours of commercial-free college football. Where I come to you guys with a little bit more of that spring deep dive series where we take a holistic look at all 138 FBS programs, let you know where I rank each team, as well as give my record prediction, at least as of spring ball going into the 2026 college football season. And we find ourselves, when you hear this conference name, you would immediately think about the Midwest, but things have certainly changed. So it could be one of the Midwestern MAC teams, or it could be one of the newcomers to the MAC going into the 2026 college football season. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoy today's deep dive of this particular program. If you do, make sure you go ahead, hit that like button, and hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel, because there's a lot of work that goes into the background for sure. So doing those two things for me would help out tremendously. A lot of work done in the background. And now, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about maybe one of the more polarizing teams in the FBS, even though they've only been here for a few minutes. Yes, I am talking about one of the newcomers in Sacramento State. The Hornets do accept the invitation. Well, they bought their way into the MAC. And so they, as a new MAC newcomer, they will check in as the 123rd ranked team in the FBS going into this season in an interesting conversation because it's a brand new era of Sacramento State in a multitude of different ways, right? We're talking about Sacramento State not only making the jump up to the FBS, but you're talking about even entering a new conference. You know, this team was part of the Big Sky, one of the better FCS conferences in quite some time. And while they didn't have a ton of success at the FCS level historically, this is a program that has shown that it is willing to invest. And that's a big reason why we see them at the FBS level today, spending all of that money to not only be a part of the FBS, but to be part of the MAC in specifically, and also moving forward as well, being willing to at least pay for some of the travel expenses for other conference opponents that make the field trip out to Sacramento, California, that state's capital. And finally, we are talking about a Sacramento State football team that is going to be breaking in a brand new head coach. Brandon Marion was here last year, and he was here after just one season, but then has decided to accept the offensive coordinator role at Colorado. So this, for the third time in 3 years, we are talking about a first-year head coach. This time it is going to be Alonzo Carter, who previously served as an assistant at Arizona, a good Arizona football team last year. And not only known for solid coaching, but you would hear Alonzo Carter, and you are talking about, one of the former backup dancers to MC Hammer. So this is someone that has seen a lot, maybe some in the football realm, but more importantly, seeing a lot of life in general. But in spite of that, we are talking about a first year head coach who has never been in charge and in that CEO role. So it's a very important hire because this hire could absolutely determine Sacramento State's tenure at the FBS, whether they do get a bigger invite down the line, whether it is going into the Mountain West or the Pac-12, which is the intended goal of Sacramento State athletics, or if they have to remain in the MAC for a longer period of time, become an FBS independent, or even worse, embarrassingly head back down to the FCS ranks because they realize that this is a different animal and they are just simply not built for it. So, him being the very first head coach and leading the transition into this brand new era of Sacramento State football, that could really determine a lot of things for the Hornets, not just for this year, but for future seasons moving forward. Could really define the rest of the decade for Sacramento State. So I didn't want to offplay that. And it's going to be a difficult challenge for Sacramento State because some of those key players that were around last season, well, they're gone. They are now gone. So let's talk about some of those losses that they had, because notably you'll find them somewhat more is talked about on the offensive side of the ball, because we are talking about the Brandon Marion departure out to Colorado. So, who are some of those key departures? I mean, their two top running backs, they're no longer here. Damian Henderson and Jaquil Smith. They followed Brandon Marion out to Boulder, and those two did combine for over 1,000 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns last season. At wide receiver, they also lose their top receiver in Ernest Campbell, who also transfers to Colorado as well. He had over 750 yards and 8 touchdowns in the previous season as well. But I think what is going to hurt Sacramento State even more is you're looking at a team in a program that lost even more key players on the defensive side of the ball than they did on the offensive side of the ball. Whether it's Dylan Hamstein, for example, the edge rusher who had 8 sacks for this Hornets defense last season, he is now at Fresno State and looking to crack Fresno State's starting lineup out in the Pac-12. How about Jalen McGoffern, who was an interior defensive lineman, but even though he was playing on the interior and consistently getting double teamed, he had 9.5 tackles for loss, plus 7 sacks as well. So this was somebody that made a huge impact on the Sacramento State defensive line last season. But then we also have to talk about the secondary. The secondary also got hit equally hard here. Koa Okai, their starting safety, for example, actually goes to play with Rice, not the food, but the university. 5 interceptions last year. He was an absolute ball hawk down the FCS. He will not be here for the FBS transition. He did also have 65 tackles as well. Plus, Jason Oliver, as San Diego State tries to backfill some of their losses that they had in the defensive backfield. Jason Oliver of Sacramento State being a backfill for the Aztecs. He had multiple interceptions last year as well. So 7 key losses there. Plus, we don't know what the starting quarterback situation is going to be like, because we did see that for the quarterbacks, they didn't necessarily they left the program, but I don't know where they landed, to be honest with you. So I say all of this meaning that Sacramento State is not going to be the same team, I think, as what they were last year. So you're really asking for guys internally in the building to primarily come in and make an impact for you in year number one at a higher level. Because when you take a look at the transfer portal additions on the opposite side, well, from a productivity standpoint, there isn't really much to get excited about, if anything at all. So that's the biggest challenge with Sacramento State, and that's why I do have them a little bit lower on my spring rankings. Why I have them coming in at 123 as a bottom 15 team. And generally, FCS programs most of the time on the way up in their first year, they have to prove themselves. In Sacramento State, because they haven't played it down yet at the highest level of college football, they just haven't done that as of yet. So, with that context out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at what that schedule holds for Sacramento State in year number one. And I do have to give them credit. They actually did do a pretty decent job of putting together a non-conference schedule at such a short notice, so that we do end up seeing the max schedule release a couple of weeks ago. So, what does that necessarily look like? So, for one, we do see that they still had Mississippi Valley State on the schedule. That was the team that they originally had prior to the jump to the FBS. That was the only FCS opponent that they opted to keep, which do really like that for the Delta Devils. That will be a rare opportunity for them to get a buy game here, to get some money for their athletic department. And in that circumstance, I think this is going to be certainly one of the safe wins that Sacramento State is going to have this year. That Mississippi Valley is going to get some money, but there's an expectation that Sacramento State should win comfortably there. And then while we're talking about the safe wins as well, in conference play, UMass does have to travel across the country to play against Sacramento State as well. UMass, I don't improved from last year, and we talked about it when we were talking about them on the UMass deep dive earlier this spring. I don't think that they're good enough to make a cross country road trip and proceed to win the game. So, that's another safe win. But let's go ahead and talk about the rest of the non conference schedule that the Hornets did manage to put together. They do have Fresno State on the road. That was a game that was originally arranged prior to the jump to the MAC, and that was kept, thankfully. So that will be one of the tougher opponents that Fresno State does end up going up against because they have to go on the road and play in their stadium. And something that isn't talked about as much is that Fresno State does have one of the better environments in the G6. So going in there and trying to win a game, that's going to be a tough challenge. And then another couple of games of note here. They have North Dakota State on the schedule as well. So the FBS debut bowl that I talked about on Twitter a couple of months ago, that turns into fruition. So we absolutely love that for the Hornets. Able to organize that game with the Bison, and it's a home and home as well. So in a future season, Sacramento State will travel to Fargo, North Dakota to play the Bison. But this year, the Bison are going to the Hornets. But to be realistic for a second, I think North Dakota State is at such a level in terms of their football team. I don't expect the Hornets to come out on top there. And then the rest of the non-conference, you have Hawaii on the road. Hawaii is looking to be a team that is going to contend for the Mountain West title. You do have 2 weeks to prepare, but you have to go on the road to end the season as well. Even though they do have a bye week beforehand, so that could work to the Hornets' benefits. But it's an intriguing non-conference schedule. You got a good Pac-12 team in Fresno State. You have a potential Mountain West contender in Hawaii out in the Mountain West, alongside North Dakota State if they get their waiver approved, which I hope they do because that transition role to me does not make any sense for teams moving up. If you move up and you prove right away that you can compete for a postseason, I think every team should be allowed to do that. I think that transition rule only makes sense for a team moving down. So some tough non-conference games for Sacramento State, but it's an intriguing one. I'm very intrigued by it for sure. But let's also talk about the non-conference schedule because Sacramento State has a lot of proving that they need to do. A little bit higher of the team on paper from a roster standpoint, but from a program and more holistic standpoint, Sacramento State has to prove themselves even more. Because I do have them as a bottom three program in the country in major college football. They do recruit at a decent level for the FCS ranks, but they were still pretty darn low in terms of recruiting. They had one solid recruiting class, but that's really about it. On top of just being a middling FCS program, is not going to lend yourself to be very high on my program rankings either. And that's my benefit of the doubt slider. So let's talk about some of those teams that you go up against in conference play. And you start off with his week zero matchup against Eastern Michigan. I think Chris Creighton is one of the better coaches in this conference. You have to make a cross country road trip to play them. So I'm leaning towards them losing that game. Then there's a huge swath after the UMass game that's winnable games as well. Bowling Green on the road with Eddie George still trying to go ahead and prove themselves. The Ohio Bobcats, they are having a similar amount of turmoil at the head coaching spot. Their third coach in 3 years, too. So they have Ohio at home. Granted, that's a program that I'm putting a lot more trust in at this time than Sacramento State's. Ball State on the road, they have a second-year head coach, so a young head coach. Matt Carney's Kent State squad is going to make the field trip to your building. And I think if they're going to win any other games besides the UMass game in conference play, this will be the one that I would circle here because I don't know if I trust Kent State enough to make a cross-country road trip and win that game on the road. And then how about Toledo? The Rockets are breaking in a brand new head coach as well in Mike Jacobs, who comes from Mercer. So you take a look at the schedule for Sacramento State, and there's absolutely a world where Sacramento State walks in here, and if things bounce their way, you're talking about an 8-4 football team. Um, Going in here and at that point, you're talking about a team that's possibly going to Detroit in year number one. Should they be able to pull that off and get that best case scenario? But I think more realistically, just because you're talking about an inexperienced head coach and you have to use the internal development in on your roster to replace a lot of those key guys that I talked about earlier here in the deep dive. You're talking about Sacramento State being closer to that 3-9 mark that I have for them. But I do think there are going to be in a lot of competitive games here in year number one. Because of the first year head coach, because of the transfer portal losses, I just don't think the expectations should be super high at this time. But I am curious to hear what you guys think down in the comments section, as well as general feedback on the series as well. If you've been enjoying this the series where I talk about all 138 programs, make sure you go ahead and do a couple things for me. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you do have to be brand new. A lot of work that's done here in the background, so just doing those couple of things for me helps me out a lot. And with that, this is Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.